American Behavioral Scientist, Volume 53, Number 6, Sense-Making Under Holographic Conditions. Framing SCAD Research, Matthew T. Wood and Alexander Kuzman. Abstract. The ellipses of due diligence riddling the official account of the 9/11 incidents continue being ignored by scholars of policy and public administration. This article introduces intellectual context for examining the policy heuristic State Crimes Against Democracy (SCAD) and its usefulness for better understanding patterns of state criminality of which no extant policy analytic model gives adequate account. This article then introduces papers included in the symposium examining the chimerical presence and perfidious legacy of state criminality against democracy. People like you journalists/intellectuals believe that solutions emerge from your judicious study of discernible reality. That's not the way the world really works anymore. We're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you are studying that reality judiciously, as you will act again, creating other new realities, which you can study, too, and that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors. And you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. It would never come into the minds of the masses to fabricate colossal untruths, and they would not believe that others could have the impudence to distort the truth so infamously. Even though the facts which prove this to be so may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver and will continue to think that there may be some other explanation. For the grossly impudent lie always leaves traces behind it, even after it has been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in this world and to all who conspire together in the art of lying. These people know only too well how to use falsehood for the basest purposes. Adolf Hitler. The past is never dead. It's not even past William Faulkner. Shock and awe? Conspiracy or standard operating procedure? The prestige that the social sciences have managed to muster has depended heavily on behavioral measurement grounded mostly on principles of observational and measurable methodologies. It is against this juggernaut methodological predilection that so-called conspiracy theorizing has been so mismeasured, derogated, ridiculed, and dismissed. Yet as 9/11 has shown anyone paying attention, regardless of motives, modus operandi, or culpability of suspects, behavior that is observable is not always measurable, at least not straightforwardly so. Likewise, that which is measurable is very often not observed. Terrorists and sovereign states alike have long shared murky modus operandi. As William Bloom, preeminent chronicler of U.S. military penetration across the globe, has commented, the de facto censorship that leaves so many Americans functionally illiterate about the history of the U.S. foreign affairs may be all the more effective because it is not so much official, heavy-handed, or conspiratorial as it is woven artlessly into the fabric of education and media. No conspiracy is needed. The editors of Reader's Digest and U.S. News and World Report do not need to meet covertly with a representative from NBC in an FBI safe house to plan next month's stories and programs. For the simple truth is that these individuals would not have reached the positions they occupy if they themselves had not all been guided through the same tunnel of camouflaged history and emerged with the same selective memory and conventional wisdom. Virtually every American would be shocked, if not also awed, by the knowledge that the U.S. government has, since we instigated or otherwise orchestrated not 1, 2, or a half dozen, but 55 and still counting coups and or raising of sovereign governments in developing nations across the globe. Syntax in these matters is of course relevant, as with the semiotic and semantic distinctions to be made between the couplets shock and awe and shock and awe. The latter is, of course, banner phrasing denoting the avowed and practiced doctrine of the United States military as follows. Shock and awe, are actions that create fears, dangers, and destruction that are incomprehensible to the people at large, specific elements/sectors of the threat society, or the leadership. Nature in the form of tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, uncontrolled fires, famine, and disease can engender shock and awe. shock and/or can also be more clinically induced. As author Naomi Klein has diligently chronicled, shock experimentation on psychiatric patients carried out in the mid-20th century in clinical venues intended to erase long-term memory storage and retrieval capacity bears homologous congruence to the neoliberalist doctrine promulgated by the Chicago School of Economics under the tutelage of Milton Friedman. As Friedman himself wrote, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function: to develop alternatives to existing policies worldwide, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. As Klein documents, for 3 decades, Friedman and his followers had methodically exploited moments of shock in other countries' foreign equivalents of 9/11, starting with Pinochet's coup on September 11, 1973. What happened on September 11, 2001, is that an ideology hatched in American universities and fortified in Washington institutions had finally had its chance to come home. Scholars reading the article before them at this moment might similarly be shocked and/or that Milton Friedman, himself awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics in 1976, consulted directly with Chilean dictator General Augusto Pinochet, advising him just weeks following his violent coup d'etat against Chilean President Salvador Allende on, as it so happens, September 11, 1973, to impose immediate, rapid-fire transformation of the Chilean economy, abiding a formula that would be replayed by U.S. involvement across the globe for the next 3 decades and more. Drastic tax cuts for the wealthy, deregulation, gutting of social services, and privatization of formerly civic functions and duties. All bundled, for the most part under plain sight. All carried out, for the most part by clockwork, following repeated murky shock and/or incidents around the globe, precipitating the rise of increasingly secretive police apparatus. Tracking the illusionary empiricism within the holographic dilemma. The quotation attributed to a high-ranking Bush official opening this article bears striking congruence with political theorist Michel Foucault's insights regarding governmentality. Implicit to all governmental truth claims is an invisible, unspoken covenant between official and public, by which the public sacrifices radical sovereignty for banal security. By this unspoken covenant, power determines by what criteria declarations and/or claims of fact must be substantiated. Even when the truth, what is real, is too obvious to deny or to spin, when, for example, weapons of mass destruction are not found in Iraq or residents of New Orleans are left stranded after Hurricane Katrina, illusory claims by elites, their auxiliaries and governing officials still leave traces that resist being overcome by the facts, as most of the rest of us understand them. This is why emergent American governmental praxis has been called the holographic state. For it manifests the capacity to render realities and policy prescriptions profoundly illusory, profoundly holographic. As with how holographic film retains its potency even after being spliced repeatedly, state authority to surveil alleged terrorist activity can now be passed its course over without losing potency. So-called lone wolf provisions of USA Patriot legislation have gutted constitutional restraints on federal authority from using intelligence gathering as pretext for expeditionary surveillance of any parties transacting or even merely receiving any electronic communication with / from alleged terrorist suspects. This permission of federal authority to appear anywhere at any time with full legal potency through so-called online sneak and peek and trap and trace authority has tumbled the firewall between federal intelligence and state and local level criminal investigation. U.S. federal authority to preempt local level criminal investigation can now be transacted with electromagnetic speed. Such blurring of intelligence and criminal investigation now effaces Fourth Amendment protections, also dual sovereignty specified by the 10th Amendment, into the foreseeable future. The official account of 9/11 bears the imprimatur of such illusory authority, as with what follows. On September 11, 2001, at 8:14 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 left Boston, just about the time when the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) had learned that American Airlines Flight 11, leaving Boston 15 minutes earlier, may have been hijacked. By 8 hours 42 minutes, the radio and transponder of Flight 11 signaled that the aircraft had veered off course, indicating that a hijacking was almost certainly in progress. Reportedly, the FAA notified the North American Aerospace Defense Command (NORAD) at 8:43 a.m. of Flight 11,